So today we're going to be talking about how trends from other categories and industries start to impact a category like home building and shopping from the consumer lens. Since consumers are being impacted by so many other categories and industries, when they have that experience, a lot of their expectations are coming from how they use their Uber app, how the Airbnb experience goes for them, how they're shopping for groceries, and also a lot of the direct-to-consumer and e-commerce brands that are starting to really change expectations for retail in general. So we're going to be covering all of that today and looking at how we can think of your category and industry from a different lens, and then ultimately where there could be innovation opportunities for you guys to consider as you're thinking about ways to market differently to them, to have people have a better experience when they're shopping for a home, reduce those pain points and friction points, and also think about that customer journey path, which often starts online now. So as we mentioned, I'm Kalyn from EBCO. So we're an innovation firm, and what's important for this presentation today is that we work across so many different verticals. So a lot of our clients will ask us, how do you know a trend is really happening? And we always say it's because there's so many proof points that are happening across different industries. So it starts to give us a great representation of how a consumer is changing or how their expectations are evolving. So whenever we do research on any category, we're always looking to validate it through different experiences that are happening. So with home building and buying, it might be looking at the retail experiences, digital experiences, online experiences, e-commerce. But we're really looking to triangulate a good cross-section of information so that we can get a good understanding of where the consumer is going to be in the next few years. And this really helps us get ahead of disruption. It helps us avoid something that's unexpected. So one of the second biggest questions we get is, why do trends matter? And if you're a very data-driven person, trends can be somewhat tricky because they're very qualitative in nature. We're not studying historically what's happened in the past. We're really looking to project out into the future and really give us a good perspective of how change is going to ultimately manifest. So we're really trying to see something that's almost invisible right now. And the way we do that is we look at what are disruptive factors that are happening to other categories. We look at ways that we can really get ahead of these movements that we ultimately think will impact. I think one of the benefits that you guys have in your industry is that it's not the fastest moving consumer category. When you look at direct-to-consumer, or, and some of you are laughing, but what I mean is that there's other categories that just move so fast. Like when we look at fashion or beauty or personal care, those categories have to innovate at a much quicker rate because their product pipelines are going every 6 months. So they give us a really good roadmap for how the expectations are changing for you. And trends also help us to think about how to invest wisely. So if it's a big investment for you guys to switch over to these platforms or think about how to visualize the journey, it's a lot of effort, it takes sometimes a lot of resources to get a ship turned around, but ultimately trends gives us that confidence that we are going in the right direction. And it might not matter exactly how we execute, but the general direction is we're moving that way, and so we're not going to get left behind in our industry. So I love this quote from Tony Robbins. He actually wrote a few books on financial wisdom recently, and he interviewed so many different leaders from the S&P 500, Fortune 1000 companies, and he said that we're used to the idea that we can predict tomorrow by looking at what happened today or yesterday, but that can't be done anymore. Now change is exponential, it's speeding up, making huge leaps forward in a shorter amounts of time. So we've seen that across categories, is that technology has really leveled the playing field. It's allowed a lot of disruptors and startups to come into categories where previously the incumbents were able to hold quite a bit of the market share. I can tell you when we work with CPG clients is that they're getting eaten alive right now. There's 500 startups trying to unbundle P&G and J&J at the moment. So they're heavily acquiring and investing in startups because they're essentially losing a ton of market share. The S&P 500, a pretty interesting stat, is that half of the S&P 500 of the largest stocks in the United States is expected to be gone in the next 10 years. So what they're expecting is that it will be new players in those positions. And so a lot of that is looking to the tech industry to see where things are headed. There's going to be a lot of the heavyweights displaced. And we've even seen that the current runtime used to be 33 years. It's now dropped to 14 years that a company maintains their position. So it just shows you how fast things are changing. And when you look at Alibaba versus Amazon versus Walmart, you start to see how everyone's truly positioning themselves as a tech ecosystem and really looking at how they can maintain their market share. So trends are really large movements that influence consumers and industries. So when you're at a size of a Walmart or an Amazon, you can essentially start a trend. But then also consumer movements can start trends. So how consumers engage and interact with the category. it also helps to tell us a larger story of why things are headed in this direction. So when we have some of these retail experiences that you'll see it's a result of consumers losing interest in a traditional retail experience. We'll also see that a lot of retailers lost their interest in things that were more difficult. So a lot of the startups that have simplified things have made it easier for consumers to have a better experience elsewhere. And so we'll be talking about those emerging forces today and different examples that we can look to when we're thinking about innovation. And this wheel just shows you some of the ways that we look at trends. We look at cultural forces, environmental, competitive, political, technological, and economic. And ultimately, that gives us a really good forecast. So what does this mean for home buying? So across the world, across retail channels, we're seeing these new disruptive changes that require new approaches and fresh thinking. So we'll be going over these 6 trends that you see on the slide today that could have an impact in your industry. So we'll be talking about everything from direct-to-consumer and multi-channel models. We'll be talking about play and engagement models, so where the consumer is actually able to play with the products, experience them, and have a better experience overall. We're talking about making expertise accessible, which is a pretty interesting trend overall. We see that in a lot of consumer categories today. More curation and less choice, actually simplifying it for consumers and allowing them to have a better experience through less options. We'll be talking about access over ownership, which I think is really interesting for home buying when we think about how the generations have really shifted with their perspective on renting versus buying and how they ultimately acquire wealth over their lifetime. And then finally, we'll talk about pop-up retail and shorter, more condensed models. So the first one that we're going to dive into is direct-to-consumer and multi-channel models. So we see in this specifically, it's really disrupting almost every consumer category. So when you think about Uber, if you're familiar with Casper, which we'll talk about in just a second, and Warby Parker, is they really re-envision those shopping experiences for consumers. They're typically geared towards a millennial audience, also a Gen Z consumer, which is just around the corner when we think about maybe a further out horizon of home buyers. And while they typically start online, what's pretty ironic is that most of the successful direct-to-consumer brands now have a physical location. So we're seeing that even younger generations want to have a retail experience. They want to first learn about that brand online and then go in person, and they feel like they're continuing that relationship. So the first example that we'll talk about today is the Casper store. So if you guys are not familiar with Casper, they're a direct-to-consumer brand that sends a mattress in a box. What I thought was pretty phenomenal, the statistic now is that there's over 650 bed-in-the-box companies in the US. So it just shows you how it didn't exist, and now it's pretty much saturated the entire category. And one of their concepts was that people do not like going to shop for a mattress. They don't like the sales pressure. There's so many different models out there that it's so hard to even decipher why you would pay more for one mattress versus another. And ultimately, there's no transparency to a consumer because one manufacturer might have one model at this store versus this other store, and they name it differently to try to confuse the consumer so you cannot compare features. And so the result to the consumer was that this industry is not very transparent. I don't like shopping for a mattress. I'm only going to do it when I have to. And so that's where Casper saw an opening to really launch online and do things very differently. So what's pretty interesting about Casper is after the initial success of their online launch and really simplifying the experience, they only had one mattress the first time they launched, is that they started opening actual storefronts. So if you're visiting Austin, I would encourage to go to the Domain, which is in North Austin, where you can actually see a lot of these brands that have storefronts here. So Casper does have a really good experience, and they actually announced plans to launch 200 more stores. So it's just showing that while they started online and they have this massive saturation of online advertising now and geo-targeting, is that they've really found their continued success in launching retail stores where people can go and actually try out the products. What's also pretty interesting is they took away the pain points of that category. So when you go to the store, you can actually try all the mattresses out in privacy. So they have these little houses that you can go into, and you don't feel like people are going to watch you or like see you sleeping or seeing you lay your head down on a pillow. And you're also not going to be harassed because nobody's on commission there. So the whole thing is to experience what your bedroom could look like. And so now what they really expanded into is in the bedroom ecosystem. So now they have sleeping lights, they have breathable sheets, they have different styles of mattresses. But the whole goal is to make it fun for the consumer and ultimately make it feel like you need to invest in this sleep environment. And so that's what's been resonating for them as they continue to grow their brand. The next one that I'm actually really excited about is Ruggable. So this is a direct-to-consumer brand where they're trying to disrupt the rug category. So again, it started as an online brand, and they really identified two major pain points for the category. They realized that, one, people tend to pay pretty high prices for rugs. It's also a very fragmented category, so if you're rug shopping, you might see a ton of options on Amazon or eBay or Wayfair. So they noticed that it was really hard for someone to actually find like a curated selection of rugs that might match their personal style. And it's also difficult to clean them, so no one really knows what to do with a rug once it's dirty. It's like, where do you take it? Now you have to research a local laundromat, or you have to try to spot clean it. And so they developed a lot of education around these two pain points to educate someone on why now they've taken these pain points away and they've made this such a simplified experience for you. And so they make these two-piece systems that you can order directly to your house. It comes in really fun packaging, and they've just really tried to reduce any friction you might have with rug shopping. Also on their website, you can shop by your style, you can shop by location, you can shop by size. So they've actually listed out all the dimensions for you to make it such a simplified experience. So even if you don't know typically what those dimensions would be, you can look at those imagery and they can see how it's mocked up for you. So that gives you confidence on how the furniture should be placed on the rug. What's also pretty interesting about their marketing is they're definitely appealing to millennials. So the rugs have really fun patterns. They're categorized by decor type. So it's really appealing to someone who might not know how to actually style it within their home, but they're getting that education from the brand itself. And what's pretty interesting about the brand, and it mirrors a lot of what we see in the direct-to-consumer category, is that it started with really heavy Instagram advertising, so really educating on people that they exist, and then now you can actually buy it in Target and Home Depot. I think Target's a really interesting retailer to consider where their strategy is headed, because if you go into a Target now, you'll see many direct-to-consumer brands that are displacing larger companies. So you'll see things like Harry's, they have Casper now in Target, they have a lot of personal care brands that started online, so now they have Ruggable as well. And so people are really actually seeking these out in a physical location, but they still have to find out about it online first to really have that brand trust and awareness. Tesla's another one, so I'd be curious if anyone raises their hand. Does anyone have a Tesla in here? Great, well, they're such awesome cars, right? And what I thought was interesting about, we actually went on an expedition where we got to go inside of the Tesla store. We were trying to look at just innovation in terms of retail experience. And actually, it was so funny because everyone that we went with had never actually been in a Tesla car. And so these were people who knew about the brand, knew about the story, knew about how successful they've been, but ultimately had never actually seen what the inside of the car looked like. So what we quickly found out was that the retail experience was really aspirational because, one, you don't have the typical sales pressure. Two, you're not outside sweating while you're trying to buy a car or freezing, which happened to me recently. And they also differentiate themselves because when you go into the store, you're ultimately going to go back home or at their computer and order the car. So there's not a pressure to actually buy it there, to feel like you're going to get a deal by quickly signing up. So there's not the normal sales tactics that you see usually in this category. They also are typically in high traffic areas. So what they're trying to do is really get people to come in, learn more about the car, not feel pressured. And so they're trying to flip that model on its head. Another thing that's pretty interesting is they have Easter eggs inside the car, that they, as they call them, where as you're playing around with the car, you learn about features that are only accessible from you actually experiencing it. So they have like knock activation features. You see that the key fob actually personalizes the car experience to you. You'll see that when you get in the car, there's even windows that go over your head that you can't see from the outside of it that make it a pretty interesting experience. So it's a really different experience, and then they also have design materials on the wall where you could further learn about how you could customize your Tesla. So I think it's pretty interesting to think about just ways to integrate into more popular, dense locations with these. I mean, this is a very smaller footprint than your normal car dealership. So they found a way to really integrate them into places like they're also at the Domain in North Austin if you go. You'll see that they're trying to get that heavy traffic to really educate people about their brand and about their offerings. And so it could be interesting to think about, is there a strategy for high traffic areas? How could we create an experience that's self-guided, so allowing the consumer to really chart their own course and give people permission to play and interact? Because when you go into the store, you don't feel awkward for jumping into the car. So they do a pretty good job at letting people actually experiencing them and then also simplifying that for the consumer. So the thought starter here would be, how could home builders and manufacturers better connect with consumers through a mix of direct-to-consumer e-commerce and physical retail channels? So thinking of someone's behavior, which might start online and ultimately end online with a purchase versus making a purchase in store. So the next trend that we're going to cover is really around play and engagement models. So we see that a lot of innovator retailers are driving foot traffic and engagement by abandoning traditional retail models for formats that are experiential but also encourage hands-on play. So the first one we'll talk about is Amazon 4-star, which is a really interesting concept from Amazon. And what they do there is that everything that they curate in the store either has a 4-star rating or it's a startup that has a really interesting technology that they're trying to highlight and help consumers learn more about. And when you go into the store, all of the devices are actually set up with little placards that tell you more about that specific product, so it encourages you to learn why people like it. They also have a digitized price tag that changes based on the day. So if something is cheaper on Amazon that day, you're still gonna get that same price. So they're trying to beat out that showrooming concept that happens with retail. But also, they're really showing reviews of why consumers like those products. So it starts to have that social proof in real life, which mirrors an online experience. So it almost feels like you're reading an Amazon review and seeing that product like you would normally browse the website. What we also thought was interesting is that being in the store is almost like being online, where there's kind of a seemingly random order of products, similar to when you're browsing and you get inspired and maybe you're on a kid's product, then you jump to a tech product, and then you learn about voice technology. So they're doing that for you to really mirror how an online experience would look in real life. And so you get that natural inspiration that happens like you would if you were browsing on Amazon. And here's just an image of some of their tech products, but as we mentioned, they have a digital price tag. They highlight the features for you. So they're trying to bring that online experience to this in-store atmosphere. So one of the other things that could be an interesting thought starter is they actually curate a specific section for that local community. So when we went to the one in New York, they actually had a wall of popular in New York items. So it could be interesting to think about if there's a certain market where there's certain features or products that tend to skew in that area. Maybe it's a more urban audience or a younger family audience, is actually showing them that that's what's most popular in that neighborhood to give people that confidence that they're making good selections. Or that they have that social proof of their local area. So the next one is Beta. This is another one I'll say is also at the domain. So if you take nothing else out of this presentation, go on a retail tour of the domain. And they call themselves a digital petting zoo. So this is where you actually get to go and experience digital products in real life and learn more about the technology. So everything that they curate is actually from a startup, and the startups actually rent out space like a consignment store. And so they rent out that space, and then as consumers buy their product, they get sales either online or through the store itself. And what we really loved about this experience is that next to everything is a tablet, like you see in this image, where you can learn more about the product, you can watch a video of how it works. So whichever way that you consume content naturally, you're gonna be able to curate that experience for yourself. So it does feel very immersive and experiential, even though you're primarily doing it through a digital device. So the way this might work with home shopping is, imagine if there's all these functionalities that a salesperson would have to speak to, but there's a tablet that really allows someone to learn about those features or unlock those features through their content medium of choice while they're actually going around and touring that showroom or that home. So that could be a really interesting way to allow for self-exploration versus someone feeling like they have to seek someone out to get that information. So as you can see, here's another example where they're allowing someone to learn about a smart water bottle. And a lot of the education, as we mentioned, is very self-guided, very experiential. What's also pretty interesting about their model is they have video cameras that are monitoring everything the consumers are doing. So they're able to get that user feedback because they can see where people are playing with certain functionalities, how long they were actually there for. And salespeople can actually, they said that one of the tricks is the salesperson will go by and swipe the iPad, and there's a certain motion that indicates to that brand that someone had a full demo of that product. So you can imagine that could really start to target how many times somebody's looking at a certain feature in the home, maybe where they got confused, if they were playing around with a certain functionality, or maybe there's a certain room that they paused in longer. This is also the same technology that Amazon Go has. So if you've been to the store, you can actually just grab something and walk out, and it actually puts it in your Amazon cart and charges you because there's videos and sensors monitoring everything that you're doing in the store. So really, we're seeing this as the new way for consumer feedback. And we expect more businesses to become this digitized in the future. So the next store we'll be talking about is a Samsung 837 store. So this is their flagship in New York City, and what it's really designed to do is really give you this future vision for retail. So instead of overtly selling products, they actually have a whole area set up like a future smart home. So you can see a fridge that's smart, that has video attached to it. There's also voice controls on things like the oven. They have smart mirrors throughout, smart exercise equipment. But what it really does is it gives you this aspirational sense of what a smart home could look like if you were actually able to afford to integrate all those features at one time. So really interesting to think about how we see tech players starting to go into the smart appliance space and how they're integrating all of these features so that there's essentially a seamless footprint throughout your house. So this could be interesting to think about. Could you appeal to a tech-forward consumer who wants everything connected through an ecosystem, or even just consider new ways to highlight technological features in the home? And then also, how do we really encourage an environment for hands-on exploration and play? So really allowing someone to unlock features as they're going throughout that shopping process, or unlock maybe hidden areas, Easter eggs of sorts as they're going through that home shopping experience. So the next trend we'll talk about is making expertise accessible. So this is actually one of our favorite trends to talk about because we see this happening in so many categories today. But really it's about how do we take the professional expertise that companies tend to have or manufacturers tend to have and then actually provide it in a way where the consumer is being educated or they're getting that expertise as a result of them doing business with the brand. So Havenly is one which is very close into your category, but pretty interesting. And there's several startups we could have talked about that also play in this space. But it's an online platform where they offer affordable interior design services. So you're able to take a style quiz, you're able to provide input, and they'll tell you what your specific style is. So it's pretty fascinating because the consumer also learns about themselves in the process, which we could go on a tangent about self-awareness trends if you take the Enneagram or you're familiar with the larger trend around self-discovery. But especially with younger generations, they love to learn who they are through these types of self-selection quizzes and these types of services that provide insight that normally you might not have that kind of analysis. But essentially what you are is you're paired with a designer who then provides you with a mood board and a custom layout. And you can select different pricing tiers, but they'll take the whole guesswork out of everything, give you links where you can go and purchase this different furniture. They'll give you the visualization so that you don't have to imagine the design. And I remember when I was purchasing a home and looking for a home, I remember asking, like, can I take all this furniture with me that's in this house? Like, can we buy a package that includes all this? And they were like, no, our home office does all the styling here, and that's not a service that we have. So I thought that was a pretty interesting answer, just with thinking about how these homes are just decorated so gorgeously, and a lot of times you want to buy what you see at that point, or just want to learn what that would take. So that seems like a pretty interesting add-on if that's not something you're currently doing. So the next brand that we'll be talking about is Sunday. So this is one that my husband actually likes, and we started purchasing this product. But it's a direct-to-consumer lawn care company, and what they've done is they've really taken the guesswork out of how to take care of your lawn. And so you can send in a sample of your soil, and then they'll send back a custom report. And they also use things like your zip code, the weather conditions, your regional area, what agriculture looks like in your area, and then they provide specific products that are designed to actually help create a greener lawn. So depending on their soil type, depending on how much shade you're getting, and then they send those out at the specific seasonal intervals for you. So what they've essentially done is just make the expertise very accessible to someone. You don't have to hire a landscaping company or a lawn care company, but you're able to get this just from purchasing their products. So we're starting to see that this expectation now is something that consumers have a lot of times on brands, is really to provide them that additional service, even if it is through a digital application or through a digital input system. And you can just see this is just an image of how you actually attach it to your hose. So the next example is Neat Method. So this is one that is pretty interesting. I've been tracking them for several years now, and they actually started with a lot of their marketing on Instagram. So you would see, just like the image you see here, it's pretty gorgeous, pretty aspirational, but they'd have these organizational images that really looks like what you want your home to look like. And pretty sure for most people, our pantry does not look like that. But they eventually evolved their business into a team of professional organizers that you can hire to actually come into your home and curate a specific area. So you can get your closet, your kitchen, your kids' room, your closet, and they're really known for their organizational expertise. So the reason that someone would seek this company out versus trying to do it yourself or hiring someone else is that you feel like they really have the aesthetic expertise that you're looking for. So people can actually select from if you're moving, if you're relocating, if you're doing virtually, they can assist with you. And it's really a done-for-you service. And so there's different facets of customization that can happen. I think it's really interesting when we think of the trend of mud rooms and also expertise based on lifestyle needs. And just how does somebody actually plan to live in a home? And these small touches and aspirations are a lot of times what could be the reason why somebody chooses one home over another, because you see this gorgeous mud room, or because you imagine how your pantry is going to look in that home, or that upgrade is going to look. And so could there be a way to have additional services that set it up for someone, or even in the shopping experience, like to show that that pantry was curated by a company like Neat, or maybe it has that aspirational lens to it. But that's really what's driving people to, they want their home to look like what they see on Instagram, essentially. So the next company that we'll talk about is Mirror. So this is a product that I'm currently in the process of, I really want to buy this. But they have a really interesting product where you engage with the interface, and it has live fitness classes that play for you. And so you can actually select all of your customizations via this smart mirror device. And what's really interesting about the company is that they're taking this concept of smart mirrors and using it as a way to educate consumers on the best practices, the best workout, and then when it actually turns off, it just looks like a regular mirror. So it has that dual functionality to it that has made it a pretty successful product. They also show biometrics and community information for how well you're doing versus the community of other people that are taking the class. So it actually coaches you. It'll say like, keep going, or you've stopped, or your heart rate has decreased. And so it's really looking at that expert lens of how to guide someone through a workout experience in their own home. So it could be interesting to think about, could consumers sign up for expertise through the home buying experience, or could there be smart mirrors and home models that explain features within the home? I mean, when all of us saw this, we were like, this is definitely the future of tech integration. I mean, just how seamless this looked, how beautiful it looked. We could definitely see where this could eventually show your agenda throughout the home, or your entertainment, but it could also be a great educational piece for even when you're in a retail experience and you're looking for engagement or learning more about features. These types of smart mirrors, not exactly from this company, but we've started to see them in retail locations throughout New York. When you're even shopping, you can hold up a piece of clothing and it'll tell you more about it, or unlock ways that you can order online and send it to your home. So could home builders and manufacturers make their offerings more attractive by making home design expertise more accessible? So this could be those aspirational elements that really push someone over the edge when they're thinking about those backyard upgrades, or those, especially in Austin, we tend to live a lot of our life outside in the yard. So when you're home buying, you might be thinking about, is it worth it to buy all these extra features? But how to really make that more attractive by guiding them through that process? Or could there be new smart home models? Because smart home is becoming really an ecosystem of how we're going to be living in the future, thinking about how to integrate technology into the home buying experience, where maybe that's part of the appliance upgrade package, or that's part of the footprint that someone's looking for when they're home shopping. So the next trend we'll talk about is more curation and less choice. So what we're seeing is that anxiety actually is at an all-time high right now. People feel like they have more choices than ever before. We're sort of always on, have an always-on mentality right now because we're always accessible via text or email. And what we're seeing is that companies are really winning by providing consumers with expertise. So having a fewer set of options, having more curation in the actual selections, and then also ultimately just trying to reduce the parallelization. And we've sort of seen this with the death of the buffet model. So what we've seen is that actually just paralyzes people. They don't know what options to make. And we're starting to see that mirrored in a lot of the brands that live online, but also then are starting to partake into more retail experiences. So Claire is one where they felt a huge industry pain point for paint was that people would go to the paint wall at Lowe's or Home Depot and not know what to select, because there's so many options. It's really hard for a lot of people to actually visualize, unless you're a designer, to visualize what that's going to look like in your home or how it's going to pair with colors that you already have. And so they actually do digital consultations that help consumers find their perfect color. So you can do that through a very detailed questionnaire. The platform is then applied to provide the perfect selection of colors. So they are leveraging some AI here, which is another trend we could talk about, but looking at how we can use artificial intelligence to actually provide recommendations based on other users that have selected something similar or have had a high success rating for that specific color in combination with other factors. So these systems start to learn over time, and they're able to curate better and better selections. We actually see this in the hair care space and the skincare space right now as well, where they're able to see how someone's skin reacts. And then the database keeps continuing that information. So there's a lot of machine learning that's happening. So with Claire, they only have 55 highly curated colors, is what they call it. So instead of having thousands of options, they're limiting you. And then they come in really millennial-inspired names, so things like Money Moves or Blue Ivy. And ultimately, they're trying to make the choice easier for consumers. And so they even send you these swatches that you can peel and stick throughout the home based on their top recommendations to you. So very different. It's not so much the consumer's going to go and pick every shade under the sun, but they're really going to get this curated selection sent to them. And then ultimately, that provides them more guidance from the brand and less paralyzed choices that could happen. So could there be a way to simplify options when you're home shopping, or rename options in a way that makes it easier for someone to choose the package or the solution that they're ultimately going to purchase? So this is one of my favorite examples in this entire presentation is block renovation. I thought they were so interesting, so I'm actually trying to help my mom renovate her bathroom right now. And so when I happened to be Googling around, I came across this new startup, and it was actually launched by somebody that used to be at the C-suite level for Rent the Runway. So if you're familiar, that's a very innovative consumer brand as well. So totally outside of your guys' normal category. And what she realized is that most consumers have the same point when they're thinking about renovation, is that it's so daunting, it's very fragmented, like how do you even know where to go to find expertise? And so when you go to block renovation, they call themselves a one-stop shop model. So you're gonna get everything you need, they're gonna take all those friction, the pain point away for you. And they really have plans to massively expand. But right now, if you go on there, you can actually select if you're gonna renovate your bathroom, I believe is the primary one that they're showing, or your kitchen. And you can pick packages that would include design, materials, labor, permitting, and they tell you what the total price is. So there's ultimate price transparency right away. You know you're paying what somebody else would pay for something similar. And they also say it takes about 3 weeks to complete. When have we ever heard that in renovations before? That's a really short timeline. And so to get a cost estimate, you would pick all your finishes out. You would pick, they actually have pre-curated options, so things that are really popular with their segment of consumers, things like subway tile, marble, and then you would have a 15-minute question quiz that you would take, and then you also submit a photo of your space. They then assemble that package for you with insurance documents, statements of work, and then they set a vetted contractor to complete the job. So what's really interesting about their website is you could actually point, or on their website, you'd point your mouse at this picture and say, yes, I want this, and then you would just pay for it. So they're just making it so seamless for someone that they're gonna get exactly what they're seeing in an image. And when we see this type of online shopping and comparison models, that's really what people are looking for, is they want what they see. So I think that sometimes can be a pain point with home shopping, where you see something so gorgeous and then the reality is you're getting something a little bit different by the time it's customized to you, or you're not getting the furniture, you're not getting the exact fixtures. So I think that type of online phenomenon, we're going to continue to see that where consumers really want what they're looking at. So the reset, this is another really interesting one that really mirrors the consumer trends we're seeing right now around simplicity. So right now, if you're not familiar, capsule wardrobes is a trend that's happening in fashion as a result of people wanting to be more sustainable, but also people don't want to think about what they're wearing every day. So we're seeing this new trend take place where people curate about 10 to 15 wardrobe items, and then those essentially will give you about maybe 30 to 40 outfits that you can remix and wear. So brands now, because that was a consumer behavior that started on Pinterest and people would share online how to build your own, we've seen that now brands are actually starting to create, or brands are being born of the trend. So the reset is one where they actually have the whole retail experience designated by collection. So you can go and shop within that collection and know that everything that you're going to buy is going to match together well. And then it can ultimately transform into dozens of different outfits. So they are playing with the simplicity model. If you go in there, the store is very bare compared to your regular fashion store. And they're ultimately trying to reduce confusion for consumers. And they actually make it very easy for you to spend a lot of money. When I happened to go there to check out the trend, of course, in the name of research, I ended up spending like 3 to 4 times more than I normally would on clothing, but I was able to justify it because you can justify the fact that you're gonna get so many outfits out of it, but also it really was easy for me to make those decisions. I didn't feel overwhelmed, I didn't feel scattered. I knew if I bought everything off this one rack, it would go together. So I had a level of confidence I might not normally have if I have to go pick out everything one by one. And I can imagine the same thing happens when you're picking out all the dozens of options you can have for a home and not having ultimate confidence. And sort of that paralysis can set in where someone's just like, okay, like this is just too daunting right now. I'm going to wait a little bit longer, or I'm going to check out a few more companies before I make a decision. Even a coworker recently, she was looking at homes, and she said she had to go for a 2-day session there where she would pick out all of her options with a designer. And she was saying how tiring it sounded to her. It didn't even sound fun. She just wanted to look at an image and say, that's what I want. So it's pretty interesting that we think that someone might like that experience, but it doesn't always resonate with people, where they feel like they don't know if they're going to actually be able to the ones to actually pick out all the options they're actually going to like. So could we win more customers by curating certain sets of choices? So if we know that subway tile and certain aesthetic preferences are in trend right now, just designating those as a named package or a named option for consumers, or even a mood that someone might want to have in a specific room. We recently went to the Lutron showroom, and they had moods named to all their lighting fixtures. So they had the good morning lights, where the shades come up, the bright lights come on, and it's a very happy sort of aesthetic that's set with the lighting. But they called it good morning. They didn't call it, like number 1 or option number 12. So it was really easy to understand. They even had party time, movie settings. So they were actually trying to find a way into consumers' lifestyle and help people resonate with which mood you might want to set for your home. So the next trend we'll talk about is access over ownership. So this is a really interesting one where we're thinking about the future US home buyer and already what we're starting to see happen in markets. But essentially this idea that, especially with younger generations, is that having the benefit to access something or rent it without the burden of ownership is a pretty popular concept. And we're seeing models already start this way with things like Rent the Runway, where you're able to rent designer clothing without ever having to own them. So essentially, it's like accessing this designer wardrobe that you're owning with a bunch of other different people, and then you're able to contact the company on their website and send pre-selected looks to your home. So they have different packages that you can select, and they actually make it easy for you. You're able to pick out options that might be for formal, for might be everyday wear, for might be for business. And they've just really had a lot of growth. We actually went to their store recently, and what was pretty interesting is that this all started online. And what they realized was that people still wanted a physical location to go to where they could drop off their clothes, where they could try things on, they could send things to the store, not have the total commitment of just sending a blind package to their house. So it really is interesting that we are seeing such a proliferation of online models now have to open storefronts to really keep the consumer engagement high. So I think what we're seeing, especially with Gen Z and younger millennials, is that they actually have a preference for physical locations over older millennials. So it's been a phenomenon that's starting to happen again, and it's because they're born online and they've had digital since day one. So now they're really looking to have that physical experience. But we're still seeing that it has to have this online presence as well, which a lot of these models that we talked to today have really start there and have been born there, and then essentially dovetail into a more physical strategy. So Feather is one that's very similar to Rent the Runway. We could argue that they probably got most of their business model concept from Rent the Runway, but it's where you can actually rent furniture at a low monthly price, and then each month you could swap it. You could decide you want to buy it. Maybe you've been using a sofa that you're like, I love this. It looks great in my space, so I'm just going to decide to own this now. Or you could return it if you're going to move or life changes and maybe it's too big for your footprint. But it's a pretty interesting concept that there's almost zero commitment that you have beyond the monthly subscription fee that you're paying. What's also interesting is that they have curated packages. So they have things like kids' rooms, living room, bedroom, dining room. So they're trying to help consumers make decisions for that specific space. And I love this marketing term on their website, but it says furniture paralysis, we can help. And so you can, again, take a quick quiz to find out how something might fit into your space or how you might use it. Module is another really interesting one, especially for home buying, so you can really see how this behavior could come to life for your category. But it's a startup that designs modular homes that can change as your family or as maybe your financial situation evolves. So you would take a quiz online, and it would give you one of 3 starter modules, which are then built by their offsite partners. And what's really interesting is they're easy to connect to additional rooms that the company would design for you. So as you grow, they say it's like Lego bricks. You can just keep adding on to your home. So let's say you have more kids, or maybe you get a different job and now you can like afford this extension onto the home. That's something that their model really allows for. So the idea is that the houses could be really affordable. So for a first-time homeowner, or for maybe a smaller urban area, and that owners can access upgrades to their homes over time. So I thought it was pretty interesting, this idea of accessing upgrades. And so maybe when you initially buy a home, you love all those features, but it's not able to fit it into the budget, or you're not able to maybe qualify for a jumbo loan. So looking at ways that we could have different financial models, or different ways that people could access those upgrades, and could that be a revenue system for a home builder over time? And so that could be really interesting to consider, especially if someone does want to stay in that certain area, or maybe doesn't want to have to upgrade to a different home. So the last trend that we'll talk about is pop-up retail. So what we see is that brands are experimenting with different types of experimental pop-ups, and really it's ultimately to build a relationship with consumers and meet them where they're at, versus have a consumer come all the way to them. And we're seeing this in the beverage space. So Recess is one where they had this pop-up. They actually have a CBD beverage. It's a sparkling tonic. And what's pretty interesting about the brand is they curated this beverage because they felt that people really now want something that's non-alcoholic, that's going to reduce stress. So it has things like CBD in it, which is another really big food and beverage trend we could talk about. And what they say is it's almost like you're accessing their brand in real life. And they say that because a lot of times consumers learn about the brand online, and then once they hear that there's a pop-up and they actually get to try it, they sort of like rush to these pop-ups to actually be able to try this beverage that they feel like has a lot of social buzz, a lot of attention. And so we're seeing that that's a really interesting marketing concept that we're seeing, especially when brands have had to educate primarily online first, and then launch pop-ups where they can actually meet customers in more crowded or dense areas to further educate them on the brand and get them to purchase. Nordstrom's another one where they have pop-ins that are curated around specific topics. So they have a new shopping experience, and the curation is really to get people in the door that maybe haven't been in the store in some time, or that like that specific topic. So they had one on sleep and recovery, they had one on love, they had one on wellness before, they had one on energy. So it had actually everything from like appliances to food products that energize you. And they actually announce the topic every 6 weeks, and it's a really compelling way for someone to want to learn about these new product offerings and feel like they're getting something different than maybe they've seen before. So you can imagine that this could maybe be around specific design trends or specific new offerings that maybe you have that you're introducing to the customer. The drugstore is one that was pretty interesting as well. So this is actually cashierless. So you would actually just go right there, you'd pick up the beverage, you would text the number of what you purchased, and then you would walk out the store and it would finish the transaction sometime throughout that day. So I thought it was pretty interesting. It's almost like on the honor system. If you don't pay, they can't really do anything. But what it speaks to is this larger trend of chatbots and communication with the consumer after they leave an experience. So we're seeing companies like ManyChat, they've just had phenomenal growth. They're actually seeing like 30% higher rates of success than email marketing right now. And so we're seeing chatbots really proliferate a lot of industries. But what can be really great about them is for such an area like home buying, is that actually texting the consumer after their experience to see if they have questions, and then having technology that can actually communicate with them and further guide them. And we're now, this is in beverage, but you can see where this could be really beneficial, especially to areas where you'd have more questions or maybe need more support after your initial interaction. So thought starter here would be, could home builders and manufacturers either have these smaller format design centers that mirror pop-ups, or could we engage consumers through technology or in a more sensorial way than we have in the past? So thank you everyone for your time today. I hope that some of this was valuable to you, and we'll be making these slides available to the team here so that they can pass this along.